Welcome to the Money Insights Podcast, where high-income earners come to learn wealth-building strategies that will take them from high income to high net worth. With your hosts, financial and wealth-building experts, Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie.
Welcome into today's episode of the Money Insights Podcast, the alternative wealth-building podcast for high-income earners. My name's Christian Allen, and Rodney the Pod is not with us today, but in his place, we have two rock stars. We've got Blake, Never Takes a Break Brogan, who's been with us now for 4 weeks in a row. Holy smokes. And we've got Brennan. Brennan, I don't have a name. I don't have a good nickname for you. What rhymes with Brennan? You know?
Felon.
That's it. And that'll encourage everybody. Hey, that's the place you want to go when you think about investing your money. Okay, so we've got Blake. How are you guys doing, by the way?
So good. So let's go with my middle name. We'll go with Clark the Mark McConnell.
Clark the Mark. Love it. Okay, sounds good. Well, we've got Blake and Brennan with us today. Rodney, the Pod, is on a humanitarian, mission, a little humanitarian trip. We're missing him. The business barely runs without Rod, but we're happy for the work he's doing. Okay. Today we're going to be talking about, well, I should say the title of the episode is Mastering the Art of Debt, How and When to Leverage It. This is specifically at Blake's request. So Blake, I'm going to let you kick us off and talk a little bit about what is leverage, what is debt really, and then we'll kind of jump into some of what are the different types of debt, what's good debt, what's bad debt, what are some of the debt myths that we hear out there from some of the talking heads. So yeah, we'll just jump into all of it, but maybe give us some context on how debt and investing even go together from a starting point.
Sure. Well, I would say, from the start, debt's a tool, right? And it can be a tool that, as you mentioned, can be used for things that are good, things that are bad. At the end of the day, debt is just using other people's money, whether that's to make a purchase or to acquire assets. And then, using other people's money in order to try to get what you want. Now, what you want could be good or bad, and we'll hit in all that, but I think it's as simple as that.
Okay, that's well said. Can I tell you guys a story to kick us off? I made a social media video and it was specifically about debt. And I used Dave Ramsey's name because he's obviously notorious for being against debt. So one of the things I've seen Dave Ramsey say is that you should not pay, or the ideal is to not use debt for anything, right? So I gave an example of, okay, how ridiculous would that be if you waited to buy your first time home until you could pay for it in cash, right? And I kind of made the point that there's, you're going to have to save up for many, many years. And not only do you not get to live in the house, but you're also missing out on all the appreciation that you could have gotten by owning the house during that time frame, even if you had a loan against it, right? So especially, you look at the last 10 or 15 years, and that would have been like explosive growth. Not owning a home would have been a really bad decision, right? Can we all agree on that? Okay, but here's the fun part. This is over Christmas. It would have been my family Christmas party, and my brother-in-law walks up to me and he's like, "Oh, I saw your video on, I think it was on LinkedIn or something like that." And he was like, "Dave Ramsey doesn't believe that." And I was like, "Okay, wait a second." So we then got into like a 10-minute argument over whether Dave Ramsey really believes that you shouldn't use debt. So then I went to his website because I had to make sure and verify. And all I could find on there was a lot of stuff suggesting that Dave Ramsey does not believe in debt. But here's the fun part. This conversation is actually heated. There are genuinely people out there who are very much on the side of don't use debt for anything if you can avoid it. Now, I'll say this, even Dave isn't telling people like hard and fast, never buy a first-time home with using debt. But he does say that would be the ideal. If you could do that, that would be better. Anyway, long story short, when we get into the debunking of debt myths, he's kind of the person that comes to the top of my list. But what are some of the things that you guys think about when Well, basically, when you hear this idea that debt should never be used for anything, like it's just like it's evil, it's bad, you stay away from it at all costs.
Yeah, I actually saw a video online the other day, and I don't want to keep, hitting the Ramsey drum, but it was Dave Ramsey.
Let's do it. Hit the Ramsey drum.
and it was another, I can't remember which YouTuber it was, but it's a popular YouTuber that is, specific towards finance. He's done a lot of wealth building in real estate and business, and he obviously uses a lot of debt. And he was in an interview with Dave, and they brought up the question to Dave, and I just thought this was just wild. And he basically said, hey, look, if a bank offered you $10 billion at 0% interest, that's debt, right?
It's very much debt.
Would you use it or not? And he said, no, wouldn't take it. And he was like, you're telling me you wouldn't take $10 billion and just put it into treasury notes or something that is so secure, super conservative? And he was like, nope, I wouldn't take the debt. It's just
great.
Crazy.
He's just like doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on it. I love it.
I think that's what happens though. If you've made your whole brand on something, right? You can teach some good principles, but if your brand is no debt at all, you go to your website, as you mentioned, Christian, it says no debt. That can be taken. I mean, it's hilarious, right? When you actually lay it out, if we're going to take that to the extreme.
We have the fortunate experience or opportunity to meet with high income earners all over the country, people who are outrageously successful. And my experience has been very much the opposite of what Dave's saying. So you guys are actively out there working with people, again, day in and day out. When we hear about kind of the myth, again, the big myth is that debt is bad. Debt can keep you from building wealth. Debt will ruin you financially, right? That's kind of the myth that's out there. What has your experience looked like as you're actually meeting with people? Maybe kick us off, Blake, and then Brennan, you can put your thoughts in there too.
Yeah, and I would say it's on the bad side of this. It's probably not the people that we meet with, but I mean, you can hear horror stories. I mean, look at real estate investors pre-2008. Everything's leveraged, right, to the hill. Market prices come down. All of a sudden, you're underwater, and the bank starts to seize the property. You lose all your values and what you've put into it. So there certainly are ways, if you're over leveraged, that things can go wrong. Also, I would say some of the rules, going back to maybe a pro of Dave Ramsey, would be if you're just using debt to acquire a higher and higher lifestyle that you can't afford, obviously that's crazy as well. Okay. On the good side though, right? As I mentioned at the start, debt is a tool, right? So using the most basic example, if I've got let's say I've got $400,000, I want to go out and buy a property. I could buy one property for $400,000 and get the cash flow from that, or I could then take that $400,000, divide it by 4, get a 25% down payment on 4 different properties. Now I have 4 properties cash flowing for me, and I get the appreciation, I get the tax benefits and things like that. So again, going back to the idea that debt's a tool, in my example there, using other people's money allowed me to purchase 3 additional properties, and all the benefits that I get to keep.
Yeah. So what you described, and from my perspective, is the concepts that we teach in investing with benefits, where we're using things like leverage to help us grow capital, grow our assets. And I guess maybe I just want to make sure we debunk the myth that debt is bad, like really clearly, because my experience has been, if you're a true wealth builder, now I do want to delineate, right? Like the person who is content with going to work, putting money in the IRAs, 401ks, waiting till 65 and retiring can accomplish what they want to accomplish by being really diligent and making sure they follow that regimen, right? They will eventually get there if they're prolific savers. But my experience has been that people who are prolific at building wealth, especially if we're talking about generational wealth or the kind of wealth that most of the people who will be listening to this podcast are looking to achieve, they're very much using debt as a tool. And I would say probably the most powerful tool that we have to create wealth, because again, to your point, leverage allows us to accelerate the process beyond probably any other kind of financial wealth building principle that exists. Brennan, what's been your experience just out there meeting with people? What have you seen?
I mean, the majority of the experience that I've had meeting with people that are utilizing debt to build wealth has been extremely positive. With that being said, sometimes debt can go south, right? Sometimes an investment, it's not so much that the debt is going south, but the investment behind the leverage that you're using can go not the way we were hoping, right? That happens every once in a while. However, the majority of the time, assuming that you do your due diligence, you do your research, which all of our clients do, most high income, high net worth individuals are going to put the effort in to at least vet what operators they're placing capital with. And by doing that, it makes it, what we like to call it at Money Insights is conservative leverage. And it's just leverage that you feel extremely comfortable with because of the people behind the deals that you're investing in. And by doing that, they're able to capture double-digit returns. They're able to get bonus depreciation on top of that to bring down their taxable income that year, right? There's all these amazing benefits by doing it. And so it's an extremely positive experience. 95% of the deals that we've seen with the operators that we utilize as kind of our community partners have been just amazing.
So I think you guys both bring up good points. I wanted to make sure we at least debunk the idea that debt is bad, right? And emphasize the fact that debt is a tool. But next, I think the important element, and you guys have both hit on this, is we always talk about conservative leverage because there is good and bad debt, not just in the amount of debt that we have, right? That can be concerning. Now, I do want to talk about risk mitigation on this in just a minute, but the amount of debt is one element, right? That's what we saw in 2008. People got so excited about the ability to create returns, and it just got caught up on it. And so far that when it turned as quickly as it did, there was no way to kind of back their way out of it, right? On the other hand, there's just bad types of debt too, right? So having too much debt is a problem. Having a bunch of credit card debt is a problem. Having a bunch of, any type of revolving debt is obviously problematic. So there's nobody here is suggesting to the audience that the right way to go is to go max out credit cards to try to invest money with it. That is very much not the way to do it, right? But so using debt to build has to be debt that's solid, that's quality debt, right? So generally we want it to be backing assets. That's why we talk about real estate so frequently. It's backing an asset that's going to be growing, compounding, and building, which keeps our debt in control. What are some of can you guys think of anything else that would fit into the bad debt, kind of good debt, bad debt? What else fits?
It could be as simple as just consumer type items, right? So it could be using debt to buy a car. Again, I would say I've used debt to buy a car. It's to buy too much of a car, right? It's like, oh, this is the payment I can afford. What's the max car I can get, or boats or things like that. So if your lifestyle is going to the point where it shouldn't be just, and you're using debt to afford that lifestyle, you're kind of spinning on a hamster wheel at that point.
I think that's perfect. So debt for lifestyle is problematic. Debt as a tool for wealth building is very much a powerful tool. Okay, so now I'm at the place where I'm believing you guys. I'm like, all right, I see that debt can be valuable. What do I need to be thinking about in order to use it responsibly and make sure that I'm being effective with it?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick on that. I think, one of the main things, and we've kind of already hit on this, but making sure that you're not over leveraged, or that you have an account that is kind of a capital reserve account, someplace that you have extra capital, in case something does go wrong. Do you have liquidity to make sure that your lifestyle stays the same and that everything's going to be all right? Right. I think it's very important to have that kind of nest egg. And I think most people do have that nest egg that we work with. And then I mentioned this as well, but making sure that whether you're investing on your own in single family type properties, or maybe you're building a multifamily unit, or if you're utilizing operators who are doing all of that for you, you're just providing the capital. It's very important to vet that deal and make sure that you feel comfortable with the numbers behind it. You got to make sure you feel comfortable with the potential distributions and the schedule of those distributions. Because if you need distributions or you need cash flow immediately, you don't want to invest in a deal that's going to be a 3-year hold, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So you got to make sure you understand how those distributions are going to come and make sure you're comfortable with that schedule.
So you nailed it, Brennan. The thing that I think I was looking for most is the easiest way to mitigate risk is to have liquidity, right? I believe in having significant liquidity both for emergencies, but for risk mitigation. And my experience has been that you can kind of weather the difficult times if you are smart enough to keep cash reserves, right? So 2 elements: conservative leverage, which means I'm not going crazy, right? Like on a property that might mean 60 or 70% leverage rather than trying to go to 80 or 90% if it's available, right? Because obviously if the market turns, then suddenly I can find myself upside down. It might, even potentially reduce cash flow. But the key there is just to make sure that there's enough significant reserve, because really that's like, from a financial perspective, that's the solution for basically every financial risk that we take on, right? Making sure that we have a pool of money that we can get to when things get a little bit tight. Okay, let's talk about, I want to go to like risk or I want to talk about debt reduction strategies. And obviously this is something that we've talked about quite a bit in the past. We have a good partner, Adam Carroll, that Brennan, you've worked with a ton. And so maybe just take a minute and talk a little bit about some of the debt reduction strategies. And I mean, I don't know if you guys are all familiar with them. There's like the snowball strategy. I probably should have looked up the various names of them, but we like to use Adam's shred method. So Brendan, maybe take a minute and talk a little bit about like what the shred method is and just give us kind of some context for it. We'll give Adam's shred method a plug and let people know that it's super valuable.
Yeah. I think the shred method, can be used for both types of people. The first being somebody that doesn't have much liquidity, that is looking to get that liquidity so that they can get into these kind of assets or investments. And then the second is for somebody who's already there, who's already got, a lot of liquidity. They're already investing in these kind of assets. So the strategy can work for both types of people. And really, all we're doing is utilizing a home equity line of credit to pay down our mortgage, because the home equity line of credit is simple interest that we're paying. So when we use the home equity line of credit to pay down our mortgage, we now transfer the debt that we're paying on as compounding debt to simple interest debt, which is a huge difference. And we accelerate the schedule of the mortgage. Usually, I mean, it's anywhere from, somebody could do it in as little as 2 to 6 years and have their mortgage paid off, the entire mortgage paid off. And they're doing it conservatively, right? They're making sure that they're doing it in an appropriate manner. And Adam kind of helps make sure that you have the correct schedule. But the whole idea behind it is that as you get that equity in your home by paying down your mortgage, your home equity line of credit continues to get larger and larger. And then that's going to become a piece of your investing. You're going to then go out, use that home equity line of credit. Most often it's going to go from the home equity line of credit into an investment optimizer policy. And then from the investment optimizer policy, it's going into an investment.
So one of the reasons we love the concept so much is he's actually using good debt to eliminate potentially less good debt, and then to free up capital to go and invest and create more return. So again, it just, for us, it philosophically matches because we believe in using debt as a tool. And one of the really brilliant things about the shred method is that it just creates an effective acceleration of debt so that, again, you can actually be a wealth builder. And the reason I think I liked it and that we connected with Adam so much is because his goal isn't, at least from my experience with him, the goal isn't just to reduce debt. The goal is actually to help people build wealth, right? Mm-hmm. And so it just so happens that shredding debt in some situations can be a really valuable and powerful first step to building wealth. Okay, so the other kind of typical things that we hear is if you're going to be eliminating debt, let's say that you check out the shred method and that's not for you. What's the next best methodology that you guys are aware of to just kind of try to reduce debt in, again, the most efficient way possibly?
I wish I looked up the name of this, because you mentioned one term, which is the debt snowball, which is basically with the snowball, what you're doing is you're just taking your smallest loan, right? And then trying to get that paid off, and then roll what you were being paid, or what you were paying on that, into the next one. So the idea of the snowball is we're just going to start knocking out these debts as quickly as possible. There's also,
which, by the way, can I just comment on the snowball method? Because in my mind, I hear that, and I do get from a psychological standpoint how that could be useful, but from a mathematical standpoint, it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So I'm like, okay, that's really great that I'm eliminating like my, an account or something like that, and it feels good. But like at the end of the day, if I eliminated, 6 or 7% debt and kept 18% debt, I probably should have done that a little bit better. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the big pull, or the big push, I should say, for the debt snowball is really more psychological. Okay, I'm starting to get things rolling, and I'm feeling good about wiping these out. But mathematically speaking, there's much better ways to do it. And again, I can't come up with the term right now, but I've seen methods where essentially what you're doing is you're plugging in your account or your loan balance, and then dividing it by your loan rate to come up with a score, and then going, from basically what you're wanting to do is pay off the worst debt to the best debt. So the worst debt would be, okay, I own credit card debt. I'm paying 20% on that right now. It's not backed by any assets. That 20% is compounding on me, right? That's going to be on the worst end, what we want to get paid off as quickly as possible. And using the shred method, using your HELOC would be a much better, a good way to pay off a credit card and essentially shift your debts. The best type of debt would be long, fixed, for instance, a 30-year mortgage where the interest rate is never going up on you. And the payments are very low for that. So really what you want to do is start with, what are you paying the highest on, and then move to lowest payments from there.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up. Let's talk about whether to pay off a house, right? This is one of those things that people have been battling with for many, many years, and everybody has different opinions on it. So you made a good point there, Blake. You said that good debt would be something that I had like a low interest. Okay, so I'll give an example here. This is my philosophy, and everyone knows already that I believe in debt as a tool. But my personal residence, I think, is at like 3.25. Now, this is causing all sorts of challenges in the housing market, right? Because no one will sell. But for me, it would be, at least just based on everything I've seen and know about debt, it feels like it would be the most ridiculous thing to pay off my house, even though I could, right? I could pay it off tomorrow, but I also have the ability to go and take the debt that I'm paying 3.25 on, and I can go. The crazy thing right now is I could go put that in a CD and earn a better return, right? So like, maybe I'll just make this like a really strong admonition to anybody listening. If you've got 3.25 debt or something under 5, really, there is no reason from my perspective to be paying that off today. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, mathematically, you're certainly right. And Brendan, I'll kick it over to you after this, but I would even take it from the point of like what you guys were just talking about in terms of liquidity being the way to, basically safeguard yourself in all sorts of situations. I would take it from that standpoint of, even if I just have access to that money, I'm going to be in a much safer position, where if I transfer, or Christian, you transfer your money over to the bank and things start, going poorly, the people who the bank aren't going to loan their money to are the ones who need it, right? If you go to the bank and say, hey, I really need this money, they're going to say, yeah, come back when you don't need it, right? And then
it's a backwards system, right?
It is. Where I feel, because I'm in the same situation as you, where I could pay off my house tomorrow morning if I wanted to go do that, but I feel a lot better knowing that I have access and liquidity over my money for emergencies or for opportunities versus in the sticks and bricks of my house. Brendan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have both sides of that. So I have a rental property where I have a 2.75% interest rate, and my renters, they pay me enough to where I'm cash flowing $400 or $500 a month. So there's no reason for me to pay that debt off, because my renters are going to pay it off for me, right? So it would just be ridiculous for me to throw $50, $100, $300,000 to get that debt paid off.
They're paying it for you and it's appreciating. I mean, maybe not this moment, but over a long period of time, it's also appreciating, right? So you're like getting double value. And by putting money back there, you've like literally created lazy money.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And I'm getting income from it, right? On top of the appreciation, on top of them paying down my debt for me, I'm collecting income off of it. So there's no reason I'd pay that off. My current mortgage is sitting at 7.5%, which is much higher.
Because you just purchased it.
Just purchased.
Recently.
Purchased. Yes. So, rates will come back down at some point. Hopefully within the next 5 years, we'll refinance it. But also in the meantime, I am putting more capital towards that in the way of using it for the shred method, because in a matter of 2 to 3 years, my plan is for this one to be a rental property, and for me to be able to get it to a point where it can cash flow that way, I need to pay off some of the principal. However, I'm still planning to utilize as much of the capital as I can to go out and create wealth in other places. So as my HELOC grows, I'll be taking from my HELOC, investing it in other assets, only to the point where I can still cash flow on the property, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Okay. So I think the only I was going to say logical, but it's not logical. The only reason that someone would like be in favor of really going ahead and paying down solid low interest rate debt would be emotional, right? Maybe they just feel more comfortable knowing that they own it. Now, I will say this, like if you understand how money works, like you probably won't feel more comfortable that way. Like I'd feel more comfortable having cash than I would having my house paid off. But I do get that, right? And to be honest with you, there's a lot of half the world is very conservative half of the United States is ultra conservative as it relates to money. And oftentimes the messaging is pay off debt, own it, be safe. You know what I mean? And what's sad about that from my perspective is that it's holding people back. It's keeping them from being able to create wealth the way that the clients that we talk to every day. So like, again, we're in this unique situation. We're talking to these people. We see these people creating wealth constantly. It just becomes the norm for us, right? But that's not what's happening out in the world for the most part. I remember early on in the business when I would just meet with whoever would sit down with me. That was like a constant battle. What do I do with my debt? Like, and so it's one of those things that I want to make sure the message is really clear that debt is a powerful tool. All you have to do is learn and understand how to use it, be relatively conservative, and make sure that you're mitigating risk by keeping plenty of capital. Okay, did I miss anything? Oh, go ahead.
One last piece on that. So I've got a brother-in-law, sister and brother-in-law. They would be considered high income, high six figures, approaching 7 figures of income. And this was probably 2.5, 3 years ago. And we were talking, they have a handful of policies with us, and we were talking about strategies for investments. And my brother-in-law's just ultra conservative. And so he was talking to me about paying down his mortgage. He wanted to get that thing paid off. And he gave me all the arguments. He said, I'll feel better. I'll have peace of mind. I won't have to worry about it. The mortgage payment's not hanging over my head. And we went back and forth quite a bit on it. And finally, what we settled on is I just said, look, don't apply it directly to the mortgage just yet. Put it into an account, into a money market account, let it earn 3, 4, 5%, and accumulate everything in that money market account. And when you have enough to pay it off, if you still want to, pay it off, pay it all off. And I'm good with it. But until you get to that point, let's just keep it in this money market account earning 3, 4, 5%. His mortgage is also at like 2.9.
Super low. So he's like, okay. Well, and again, what you did is help him create a safer opportunity, right? Because now you have the ability to pay off the house, but you've also got the liquidity and safety that you need. So it's like it's a huge win. And then of course gives you a little time to work on them and get them start to think about building wealth in other ways that can kind of accelerate what he's already, which by the way, it sounds like they're already ultra successful. And so once you get that, like I call it a true wealth builder, right? Like once you get to that type of mindset, suddenly it can get really crazy if you're a 7-figure earner and you're starting to think the right direction.
And he still has it. He still has his mortgage. He's got enough to pay it off, but
Okay. Well done, Brennan. Props for that. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, before we close up, I want to talk a little bit about how some of the ways that we use debt. So you mentioned it, right? We talked about the SHRED method. That's a great way to use debt for building wealth. And again, the idea is to pay down the debt that then creates liquidity that we can go and invest. And then you brought up, Brennan, that kind of next step. So let's take it on the next step. We always talk about the investment optimizer. So anyone who's listening knows that we're talking about a life insurance policy that's been funded for cash value growth that's supposed to be used to invest. But maybe talk a little bit about the capital avalanche and premium financing. Brennan, you can take a shot at this, and just how we're using another way that we're using debt to create wealth.
Yeah, people love this strategy. It's really cool. It's really fascinating. A lot of times, when I give people the Cliff Notes, I had this the other day. He's like, I'm in. He's like, you don't have to tell me more.
That sounds good. I'm in. Okay, now here's the thing. I got props from someone the other day. Oh, I think it was Bill Faith. I was on Bill Faith's pod the other day, and he was kind enough to give me props for actually bringing up that there is a downside, that there is an other side to it. Basically, what I told him is that everybody would do both the investment optimizer and the capital avalanche, like without question almost, if there wasn't the initial policy cost, right? That initial cost that we take in the very first year, that's like, the long term, it's like, this is crazy. It's really opportunistic. It creates a lot of things we couldn't do any other way. And I'll let you get into that in a second, but we'll also make sure that we hit on the backside. Okay. So Brendan, keep going. Talk to us about, what it is and kind of how we're using it.
Yeah. So at a high level, this is really a strategy that's been used for decades. It's mainly only been available for ultra high net worth individuals. And traditionally it's called premium financing. And in traditional premium financing, basically what's happening is the client is funding a portion of the policy while the bank is coming in and financing the lion's share of it. A lot of times it'll be something like a 90-10 split. Maybe it's $1 million premium would be a common one. And so $100,000 is coming from the client every year, $900,000 from the bank every year. And then on top of that, until the cash value in the policies are enough to be the collateral for that loan, that individual has to come up with some sort of outside collateral. It might be a brokerage account, something that the bank can use until the cash value gets significant enough, which typically on average happens around year 5 to 7 in those kind of policies. So capital avalanche is another way to utilize that kind of strategy. But basically it's just made available to really anyone that makes more than really $100,000. And I say that, with a grain of salt, because really you need about $100,000 to start one of these policies. However, a lot of people that we work with may only have an income of 100K, but they also have other assets that are producing income that would allow them to participate in that kind of strategy. So capital avalanche is something that we feel is a more conservative approach than traditional premium financing. And mainly that's because of what levers we can pull as we're using the policy. But on top of that, how the policies are structured. So instead of doing a 90-10 split right off the bat, where the bank's coming in immediately and using leverage, we're actually having the client fund 100% of that premium that first year. So 100% of the premium, let's call it $100,000, is going in, and that's all done by the client contribution. There's no leverage at that point. Then what's happening is starting in the second year, and it doesn't have to be the second year. Some people, if they want to be, even more conservative than we're already being, they may choose to put in half or another full premium that second year. But most commonly, it's just a one-time premium. And then starting in that second year, that's when we start implementing and utilizing debt to accelerate our returns. So basically, we take the cash value that we created in the cash in policy from our initial contribution. That's acting as collateral for us to go out and get $100,000 to fund the policy in year 2. That's going to increase the cash value between the 2 years to about $165,000, which is more than enough for that 100K loan. And then we just repeat that over and over again and in perpetuity. And what we're doing is we're counting on average, what we're paying on the bank loan and what we're earning in the policy. We're counting on about a 2% spread on average over the long run. We know there's going to be years where there's a negative spread in that scenario. There's going to be years where there's a much higher spread than just the 2%. But assuming we get that 2%, which is it's a very likely scenario based on historical numbers that we've used. That's going to create a double-digit return, something between 10, 15%. And again, that's going to be a tax-free return. So a lot of people love this strategy because we're using conservative leverage. We are getting an asset that is being accelerated by leverage, and then we're getting a tax-free income stream at some point down the road. Sometimes, usually it's around year 10. Sometimes we can get it a little sooner if we structure the policy differently. Sometimes people defer it a little bit later. And then lastly, after that income stream comes in, there's going to be a large death benefit that pays out that's going to go towards estate planning, or for a lot of our high income earners or high net worth individuals, it's going to go towards estate taxes, and it's going to help keep their estate whole.
Okay, so that was a really good overview. And we use primarily, I'm going to say 3, right? There's two core strategies that we talk about all the time, right? We talk about the investment optimizer. We talk about the capital avalanche. Both of those are utilizing life insurance and leverage, right? But then the key element, and Blake, in our life insurance conversation over the last couple of weeks, I thought you nailed this really well. It is the most important element from a wealth building perspective is that those things, again, are tools. The couple of things I love about the capital avalanche that make it unique and that I wanted to emphasize is, one, that there's no outside collateral. So it makes it more conservative than what we're doing. But what's really crazy about it is that it's more conservative, but over the long run actually creates far more leverage than in a traditional situation. So Brendan gave the example of, let's say that I have $100 or $1 million going in for 10 years and I'm paying $100,000 of it. Well, let's just say the same thing applied inside the capital avalanche. I pay my $1 million premium. The next year, $1 million goes in, but then the bank can in perpetuity continue to put that in. So 20, 30 years down the line, you can still be doing that. And again, I'm doing it all without creating outside collateral, which again is just more risk. So we're both making it more conservative and increasing the leverage just over time instead of doing it all at once. Okay, so quick overview of some of the things that are kind of core strategies. The first one that we always talk about is the investment optimizer. Blake, you mentioned this in our last episode. You emphasized the fact that the tools that we use, and again, it doesn't matter what tool that is, but the tools that we use, specifically in this case, the investment optimizer, is really a pathway to create the wealth, right? It's not the end game. And this ends up being kind of challenging for people in a lot of ways. Like in the investment optimizer, when we're utilizing leverage, right? It's in a little bit of a different way. The goal always has to be to go create real returns. And if I do that, then suddenly leverage and debt become really powerful tools. If I don't do that, right? If I borrow and then I don't go and invest it, then suddenly I'm creating the situation that Dave Ramsey's talking about, right? Where I'm just ending up in trouble. Okay. So core strategies we hit on: investment optimizer, capital avalanche, investing in real estate or other alternative assets utilizing leverage. Is there any other leverage elements that we missed? I'm going to take your silence as gospel. We've covered everything. Okay. So thanks everybody for hanging out with us today. Remember, if you're going to use debt, make sure you use debt wisely. But it is without question the most powerful wealth building tool we have. Brennan, Blake, thanks for coming on with us, and we'll see y'all next week.
Thank you for listening to the Money Insights podcast. To learn more about the financial and business strategies discussed in this show, please visit moneyinsights.net. The views and opinions expressed on the Money Insights podcast are not intended to be individual financial, tax, or legal advice. Always consult with the appropriate advisor before making financial decisions. And if you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This will help others find the show and learn wealth building strategies for themselves. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.